The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the small coastal town of Halifax washed clean. Roofs glistened under a pale strip of sunlight, breaking through the clouds, and puddles reflected the soft blue of a clearing sky. On the edge of Maple Lane, Noah Grant steadied a ladder against a battered porch. His boots were soaked, his gloves frayed, and the scent of wet cedar clung to him like memory. He moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who'd rebuilt too many roofs to count, one nail at a time, one day at a time, fixing what life had blown apart. Inside the house, a kettle whistled faintly. Elena's voice, light, high, full of mischief, called through the open window. "Daddy, you promised pancakes." Noah smiled without looking down. "I did. But first, this roof's got to stop crying." She giggled, satisfied with the answer. The way children are when their world still feels safe. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke the calm. A sleek black SUV rolled up the narrow road, too polished for a neighborhood of weathered fences and salt-stained shingles. It stopped in front of Noah's gate. For a moment, silence. Then the passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, silver hair slicked back, tailored coat perfectly dry despite the wet air. Richard Reed carried himself like someone who owned every room he entered, even the ones that didn't want him. Noah climbed down, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard didn't answer right away. His gaze swept over the modest yard, the patched siding, the swing Elena had painted in uneven streaks of color. Finally, he nodded toward the SUV. "You're Noah Grant?" "Yes, sir. I was told you have a place by the coast. Quiet, isolated." "That's right." Richard turned slightly. "Then perhaps you can help me." From the back seat came a faint movement. The door opened, and a young woman appeared. Clara Reed. Her hair was pinned neatly, her expression composed, but there was something hollow in her eyes, the kind of emptiness that comes from pain that's outlived the sympathy of others. A wheelchair waited by the curb. She didn't need help to reach it. Her movements were practiced, mechanical, as if grace had become armor. "This is my daughter," Richard said, his tone clipped, like a business transaction. "She was injured 2 years ago. Doctors say her progress has plateaued. I'm not convinced." Noah looked from father to daughter. "And you came here because I was told you know how to work with people. You've helped veterans, kids with trauma. Clara doesn't need more hospitals. She needs quiet. 10 days by the ocean. If she's comfortable, I'll double your rate." "I'm not a therapist," Noah said softly. "And I don't charge by the miracle." Richard's jaw tightened. "So you'll refuse?" Noah studied Clara. She hadn't looked at him once, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where gulls circled above the water. Beneath her composure, he saw the subtle tremor in her hands. Fear, exhaustion, pride, all too familiar. He took a breath. "No, I'll do it. Not for your money, because I know what it's like, to be afraid of stillness and not know if silence will save you or drown you." For the first time, Clara looked at him. Not fully, but enough. A flicker of curiosity, disbelief, maybe even a spark of hope she didn't want to name. From the porch, Elena burst through the door, barefoot and beaming. "Hi, I'm Elena. Are you staying with us? We have crayons and a swing that makes bird noises." Clara blinked, startled. Well, she'll be staying near the ocean," Richard interjected. Elena nodded solemnly, then whispered to Noah, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Can I show her my rainbow set?" I think she forgot how to smile. Noah hid a grin. "Maybe later, kiddo." Clara's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something that softened her face. Richard seemed not to notice. He was already checking his watch. 10 days, he said. "I'll send someone on the 11th. Don't expect gratitude if this doesn't work." "I don't," Noah replied. Richard gave a curt nod and returned to the car. The SUV disappeared up the road, leaving only the hiss of wet tires fading into distance. Noah turned back to Clara. The wind caught her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain and salt. "You ready?" "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Good place to start," he said. "No one comes to the coast ready." He lifted her chair into the truck bed, careful not to startle her. Clara watched his hands, steady, unhurried, respectful. When he offered her a hand to steady herself, she hesitated, then took it. As they drove toward the shoreline, the road curved through stands of spruce and birch, the ocean glinting through gaps in the trees. The sky was still heavy with the memory of rain. Elena leaned forward from the back seat, coloring in her lap. "Miss Clara," she said suddenly, "when the sun comes out, I'll teach you to draw rainbows. They only show up after storms." Clara glanced at her, surprised. "Is that so?" "Yep," Elena said proudly. "You just have to stay long enough to see one." For the first time in months, Clara let out a breath that almost sounded like laughter. She turned toward the window, watching the waves rise and fall beyond the cliffs. Somewhere deep inside, a small, fragile part of her dared to believe the little girl might be right. And as Noah drove on, his eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror. Clara's reflection, the faintest trace of color returning to her cheeks. He didn't know what the next 10 days would bring, but he knew this. Healing never began with medicine. It began with presence. The truck disappeared down the road toward the sea, leaving behind the hush of wet leaves and the echo of a new story just beginning. If this opening touched you, stay with the journey, because what starts as 10 quiet days by the ocean may just become the healing of 3 hearts and a reminder that kindness still changes lives. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine through the cracked window as Clara sat by the old oak desk, watching the rain return in thin silver lines. The sea beyond the cliff shifted restlessly, waves breaking in patterns that seemed to mirror her own unease. The house creaked softly, an honest sound, not polished or rehearsed like the city life she'd left behind. Somewhere outside, metal clinked against wood. Noah was on the roof again. Through the thin curtain, Clara could just make out his silhouette, steady despite the wind, hammer in hand, movements sure and unhurried. He worked like someone who didn't need to prove anything, who spoke more with effort than words. Every thud of his hammer was measured, grounding. She tried to look away, but couldn't. There was something almost defiant about the simplicity of it. How calm he looked up there, balanced between gray clouds and wet shingles, while she, sitting perfectly still, felt trapped in her own body. A small knock startled her. Elena peeked in, face bright, curls frizzy from humidity. "You like games?" she asked. Clara hesitated. "What kind of games?" "Dominoes," Elena said proudly, holding up a faded tin box. "It's my grandma's. Daddy says it's good for thinking." "I don't really play games." "That's okay. You can watch me win." Elena plopped down on the floor, laying out the pieces one by one. Her tiny fingers moved with fierce concentration. Clara watched despite herself, the corners of her lips twitching. The girl hummed softly, a tune both messy and sweet. After a while, Elena looked up. "You can take one turn if you want. It's more fun with 2. Clara sighed. "You don't give up, do you?" "Nope," the child said cheerfully. "Daddy says that's a good thing. He never gives up either, especially on roofs." Clara took a piece from the box, turning it over between her fingers. The edges were chipped, the dots worn smooth. "Okay," she said quietly. "One turn." By the time Noah came down, dusk had begun to settle, stretching shadows across the floorboards. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Clara and Elena hunched over the dominoes, the sound of laughter, small but real, spilling from the room. His lips lifted in the faintest smile. "I see my best players got competition." Elena grinned. "She's good, but I'm better." Clara looked up at him, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You teach her to be this persuasive?" "Didn't have to, Desses," Noah said, hanging his jacket. "She came that way." That evening, the rain thickened into a steady rhythm against the roof Noah had just fixed. He moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who didn't need recipes, just instinct. The air filled with the scent of baked salmon, rosemary, and a hint of lemon. The flicker of candlelight softened the lines of the room, and even Clara's wheelchair seemed less like a boundary more like a place she could simply exist. When Noah set the table, Clara protested. You don't have to. Already did, he said gently, pulling out a chair beside her. You're the guest, remember? Elena climbed onto her seat, swinging her legs. We say grace here. Daddy says it's not just about food. It's about saying thank you for still having a day to eat it. Clara nodded faintly. That's nice. Noah bowed his head. For what we have, for what we lost, and what's still worth holding on to. They ate quietly at first. The only sounds were forks tapping plates and the rain whispering on the glass. Then, slowly, the silence filled with small talk. Elena describing the colors of her imaginary rainbow. Noah recounting how the storm last night had torn down half the dock, but spared the little crab traps he'd built with local kids. Clara listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her voice was softer, lighter. After dinner, Noah cleared the dishes, while Clara rolled herself to the window. The waves shimmered under the moonlight, endless and indifferent. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to look away from beauty. It didn't hurt quite as much to see something alive when she still felt half broken. She heard Noah behind her, drying his hands with a towel. You can hear them? He asked. The waves? Yeah. When I first moved here, they kept me up all night. Too loud. Now I can't sleep without them. Clara tilted her head. They sound like breathing. Exactly. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, I forgot what silence felt like when it didn't hurt. Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The rain slowed, as if the sky itself was listening. Elena had fallen asleep on the couch, her hand still clutching a domino piece. Noah lifted her gently, carrying her to her small room. When he came back, the candles had burned low, their light golden and tender. Clara sat still by the window, eyes distant but calm. Outside, the sea breathed, steady and eternal. Inside, something fragile began to loosen its hold. A tension Clara had carried too long, melting like frost under warmth she didn't yet understand. In that quiet house by the rain-washed coast, 3 lives, so different, so scarred, had begun, without realizing it, to move toward each other. And as the last drop of rain fell from the roof Noah had rebuilt, the story that started with a storm began to hum with the sound of something gentler, healing. The morning came clear and cold, the kind of Atlantic chill that bit through denim and whispered against the bones. Mist hung over the meadow, soft as breath, blurring the line between earth and sea. From the kitchen window, Clara watched Noah, stacking kindling outside, his movements precise, steady. She had grown used to his silence, the way he spoke little but managed to fill a room with a calm that settled even the restless parts of her. When he looked up and caught her watching, he gave a small nod toward the path that led beyond the hill. The tide's low, he said. Good morning for a walk. I don't walk, she replied, half teasing, half bitter. He dried his hands on a towel. Then I'll roll you, she hesitated. You think that's funny? No, he said simply. I think it's living. 10 minutes later, they were outside. The air carried the smell of wet earth and pine sap. Elena darted ahead, her boots splashing through puddles left by the night rain, her laughter chasing the gulls that skimmed over the cliffs. The path narrowed into a slope of grass leading down to the creek that curved like a silver thread toward the ocean. When they reached the bank, the water moved slow, clear, glinting with shards of light. Noah stopped the chair at the edge and crouched beside her. Take off your shoes, he said. Clara frowned. You've lost your mind. Maybe, he said with a small grin. But there's method in it. She crossed her arms. It's freezing. I'll pass. He dipped his hand into the creek, letting water run over his fingers. Cold's good. It wakes the nerves. Reminds the body it's still got messages to send. She shook her head, but he didn't push. He just sat beside her, patient, letting the wind do the convincing. The sound of the current filled the pause, steady, whispering, ancient. After a while, his voice came low, almost to himself. Water here remembers. Every cut it's run over, Every wound that's healed. That's why I come down here when I forget who I am. It doesn't judge, just keeps flowing. Clara looked at him, unsure whether to scoff or listen. But something in his tone, something reverent, made her chest tighten. She unlaced one shoe, then the other, her fingers trembling, not from cold, but from fear she couldn't name. Happy, she muttered. Not yet, he said softly. Now touch it. She glared at him, but then with a reluctant sigh, she leaned forward and let her bare foot dip into the stream. The shock hit instantly, sharp, electric, alive. She gasped. God, that's freezing, Noah smiled. Good. Means your nerves still talk to your brain. Keep them talking. The water was icy, biting, but beneath the sting, there was a pulse, steady and real, like the creek itself was breathing through her. She kept her foot there longer than she thought she could. Then, quietly, tears began to well up and spill down her cheeks before she even noticed. Noah didn't move closer, didn't speak. He just watched, letting her have the moment. I hate that it hurts, she whispered. I know, he said. But sometimes, pain's the body remembering it wants to. Live, Elena's voice rang out from a few feet away. Look, she cried, crouched on the sandbar. With a stick, she was drawing something in the damp sand. A crooked heart, uneven but bright. It's for you, Miss Clara. The water will keep it safe. Clara laughed through her tears. That's not how hearts work, sweetheart. Sure it is, Elena said. Daddy says love floats. Noah chuckled under his breath. She's not wrong. Clara's shoulders shook with another quiet laugh, the kind that slips out before sorrow can stop it. She looked down at her feet again. The water had gone from biting to cool, the shock turning into something else. Sensation. A spark. A message. Her left foot twitched. Just once. Small and uncertain. Then again. Her breath caught. Did you see that? I saw, Noah said, voice steady, as if afraid to break the spell. It moved, she whispered, staring at the rippling surface. I felt it move. Elena gasped so loud it echoed across the water. You did it! You're magic! Clara shook her head, laughing and crying all at once. No, sweetheart. It's not magic. Noah's voice came low beside her. It's memory. They stayed there a long time, no one rushing the moment. The creek murmured against the stones. The gulls cried overhead, and the air carried the sweet sting of salt. Clara's feet stayed in the water, her fingers gripping the arms of her chair, eyes wide as if seeing herself for the first time in years. Eventually, Noah stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans. That's enough for today. Your legs will thank you later. I doubt that, she said, smiling faintly. He reached out a hand. You did more than most people do in a year. She took his hand this time without hesitation. The warmth of his palm startled her. Solid, reassuring, grounding. As they started back up the hill, Elena skipped ahead, her little heart drawing already, washing away behind them, swept gently into the current. Clara glanced back, watching it dissolve. For once, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. By the time they reached the porch, her legs tingled with a dull ache that wasn't unpleasant. She leaned her head back, breathing in the sea air. The world felt wider, sharper, painfully alive. Noah leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. You'll be sore tomorrow. Then maybe it's working, she said. He smiled. That's how it starts. Inside, Elena hummed, while setting the table for lunch. Her tune the same one she'd sung with her dominoes. Clara listened to it, drift through the open door, and for the first time, it didn't sound like someone else's happiness. It sounded like possibility. Later, when Noah stepped outside again to gather firewood, he caught her watching him from the window. She didn't look away this time. Their eyes met across the distance, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Something unspoken but sure. Down by the creek, the water kept moving, carrying bits of sunlight in its ripples, as if collecting fragments of all that had been broken and stitching them together again. And in that rhythm, that endless whisper of water against stone, something in Clara shifted. Not her body this time, but her heart. It was the smallest movement, but it was real, and that was enough to begin. The afternoon sun spread in slow ribbons across the porch, warm against the faded wood. The sound of the creek still hummed in the distance, and somewhere near the garden, Elena's laughter danced with the wind. Noah sat on the porch steps, a cup of tea cooling in his hand. Beside him, Clara leaned back against a cushion, her legs wrapped in a blanket, the faintest color in her cheeks. Elena lay curled in her lap, tracing invisible shapes on Clara's arm with a finger. For a long while, no one spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full, like the quiet that follows understanding. Clara tilted her head slightly toward Noah. "You know," she murmured, "a month ago I couldn't feel rain. I'd forgotten what it meant to be touched by something simple." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Sometimes simple things do the hardest work." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you tell yourself to get through the day." "Maybe," he said, glancing at Elena, "but it's also how I get her through the night." Before Clara could answer, the crunch of gravel interrupted them. A car door slammed. The stillness broke. Richard Reed was back. He strode up the path in his dark coat, his expression carved from something sharp and cold. The ocean wind tugged at his hair, but nothing about him seemed moved by weather or mercy. Behind him, the sleek black sedan idled like a waiting shadow. Clara stiffened, instinctively pulling the blanket closer. Noah didn't move. Elena blinked up from her lap, sensing the shift in the air. Richard stopped at the foot of the steps, taking in the sight, his daughter, barefoot under a blanket, a child in her arms, and a man he considered beneath her sitting a few feet away, as if the world were perfectly at ease. His voice came low but shaking with restrained fury. "What exactly is this?" Clara started to answer, but Noah spoke first. "We were having tea." "Tea," Richard repeated, his tone dripping disbelief. "My daughter, who hasn't left a hospital or a penthouse without supervision in 2 years, is sitting here playing house with a man who fixes fences." Noah met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "She's not playing, Mr. Reed. She's living." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Living? She's a patient, not a project. You think a few strolls and poetic nonsense about creeks can fix what medicine couldn't?" Noah's voice stayed level. "I'm not trying to fix her." "Then what are you doing, being here?" Noah said simply. "Listening, giving her space to stand when she's ready." Richard's face flushed. "You presume to understand her recovery better than the specialists who've spent years." "I don't presume anything," Noah cut in, still quiet but firm. "I just don't believe healing listens to titles." For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. Clara's fingers tightened around Elena's shoulder. "Dad, please!" He turned sharply to her. "You don't see what's happening, Clara. You're vulnerable. This man, she interrupted, voice trembling but clear, is the only person who talks to me like I'm still whole." The words landed like a stone, dropped into still water. Richard blinked, stunned. "You think that's kindness? He's filling your head with hope he can't sustain." "Hope," Clara said, her tone rising, "isn't poison, Dad." Noah stood then, setting his cup aside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His height alone evened the balance between them. "Mr. Reed, if you came here to take her back, I won't stop you. But don't mistake peace for weakness. She's not under a spell. She's remembering herself. And that's something no one can buy." Richard's gaze hardened. "You talk a good sermon, Mr. Grant, but let me be clear. If she gets hurt, if she falls again, that blood's on you." Noah looked at him steadily. "If she falls, I'll help her stand. That's what people do when they care." The older man's jaw flexed. Words caught between pride and disbelief. "You don't know what caring for her means. You've never watched your own child die in spirit while the world applauds your wealth." Noah's expression softened, but his eyes didn't waver. "No, sir. But I've held a child who wasn't mine until she believed she was loved anyway. Maybe that's close." Behind them, Elena shifted in Clara's lap. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice small but brave. Miss Clara smiled today. That means she's getting better. Richard turned his head toward the girl. For the first time, his anger faltered. Elena's earnest eyes met his, wide and unblinking. Something in him, the part still capable of remembering gentleness, stirred, but quickly retreated behind years of habit. He straightened his coat. I'll be back in a few days, he said, his tone clipped. I expect her to be ready to return home. Home? Clara whispered. You mean the glass cage? Enough, he snapped. You're coming back to where you belong. Noah's voice came quiet, but sure. She belongs where she breathes easy. Richard froze, his hands tightening at his sides. For a second it seemed he might strike back, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to cut. Then, instead, he exhaled through his nose, turned on his heel, and walked down the steps. The sedan door slammed, and the car disappeared down the road, leaving dust in its wake. When the Osseeks sound faded, only the rustle of the trees remained. Clara didn't move for a while. Her breathing was uneven, eyes glassy but dry. Noah knelt beside her, one hand resting lightly on the armrest of her chair. You okay? I'm tired, she said. Not of him, just of having to defend the way I feel. Elena leaned closer, whispering, He looked like a thundercloud. Clara smiled weakly. He always does. Noah glanced toward the road, where the car had vanished. He loves you. Just doesn't know how to show it without holding the leash. Clara turned to him. And you? What do you call what you're doing? He thought for a moment, then said, letting go of the leash. Her laughter came out fragile but real. You have a dangerous way of saying things that sound like truth. I just say what I see, he answered. That evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs, Noah sat on the porch again, carving a piece of driftwood. Clara watched from her chair, Elena asleep against her shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Between them, the air carried something unspoken, a quiet vow born not of defiance, but of dignity. And far off, where the ocean met the horizon, the tide shifted, as if even the sea understood. Some storms don't need to be outrun. They just need someone willing to stand through them. The morning air was sharp with the scent of rain and sawdust. Out in the yard, Noah bent over a pair of rusted steel pipes, sparks flickering as he welded them together. The rhythmic crackle of metal echoed through the open field, like the heartbeat of something being built. Not perfect, but alive. From the porch, Clara watched, wrapped in a blanket. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands caught in the wind. She had grown used to the sounds of this place, the ocean murmuring behind the hills, the steady hammering from Noah's workshop, Elena's humming somewhere close by. It was noisy, yes, but not the kind of noise that hurt. It was the sound of life moving forward. What is he making? Clara asked, when Elena appeared at her side, a piece of toast in one hand and a crayon in the other. Bars, Elena said proudly, crumbs falling down her chin. For you. Clara blinked. For me? He said you were ready. Clara's throat tightened. She looked out again. Noah stood back from his work, inspecting the welded joints, sweat glinting along his temples. The structure wasn't beautiful. It was raw, uneven, but solid. 2 parallel rails anchored into the earth. Later, Noah wheeled her outside. The morning had cleared, leaving puddles that reflected the soft blue of the sky. He stopped beside the bars. They're not fancy, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. But they'll hold. Clara stared at them, her pulse quickening. You think I'm ready for this? I don't know, he said honestly. But I think you're curious enough to find out. She hesitated. Her fingers clenched around the arms of the wheelchair. What if I fall? Then I'll catch you, he said simply. And if you fall again, I'll still be here. The air was still, except for the whisper of the sea. Clara took a deep breath. With Noah's steady hands at her sides, she reached for the bars. Her palms pressed against the cool metal. Her shoulders trembled. Elena stood a few feet away, bouncing on her toes. You can do it, Miss Clara. I believe in you. Don't say that too loud, Clara said through a shaky laugh. It makes it sound important. It is, the little girl insisted. Noah met Clara's eyes. Whenever you're ready. Clara inhaled again. The world seemed to narrow. No sky, no porch, no waves. Just her and the space between the rails. She shifted her weight forward. One foot slid down until her heel touched the ground. Then the other. For a heartbeat, her legs felt like glass, fragile and foreign. And then she stood. Not perfectly, not fully, but upright. Her breath hitched. Her body wavered, and Noah's hand hovered an inch from her waist. Not touching, just ready. "Look, Daddy," Elena shouted, clapping so hard she dropped her toast. "She's doing it," Clara let out a breath that turned into a sob. "Oh God, I'm standing." "Yeah," Noah whispered. "You are." It lasted only a few seconds before her legs gave way. But when Noah eased her back into the chair, her face was wet with tears. Real tears. Not of pain or frustration, but release. The kind that comes when a door long locked finally creaks open. Elena raced forward, throwing her arms around Clara's shoulders. "You did it! You really did it!" Clara laughed through her tears, hugging her back. "You're heavy for someone so small." "I'm strength training," the girl declared proudly. From the road nearby, two neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, had paused on their morning walk. They stood at the gate, watching with quiet awe. Mr. Holloway lifted a hand in salute. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "Didn't think I'd see her up so soon." Noah nodded politely, embarrassed by the attention. "She did the work. I just built the bars." But word spread, as it always does in small towns. Within days, people who had barely spoken to Noah since he moved in began dropping by, some with casseroles, some with curiosity, most with respect. They called what happened a miracle, though Noah never used the word. "It's not a miracle," he told Clara one evening as they sat by the fire. "It's persistence, with better lighting." Clara smiled. "You're terrible at taking credit." He shrugged. "Credit doesn't fix roofs or hearts. Doing the work does." As the days passed, she practiced more. At first minutes, then longer. Each morning she'd grip the bars, lift herself, and breathe through the tremors. Some days she stood taller. Others, her legs refused to listen. But she kept trying. And every time she looked up, Noah was there, never pushing, never pitying, just there. Elena would sit cross-legged nearby, drawing pictures of the day Miss Clara stood up, her crayons filling the paper with crooked hearts and stick figures. She taped them all over the kitchen walls until the house looked like a gallery of joy. Slowly, the rhythm of life changed. Breakfast became a ritual, Elena pouring too much syrup, Noah pretending to scold her, Clara sipping coffee with a half-smile. The smell of wood smoke and maple filled the mornings. Sometimes the rain would tap gently on the windows, and instead of wincing, Clara found herself listening, even humming along with the rhythm. At night, she would lie in bed and hear the ocean, and for the first time, the sound didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like company. One afternoon, while Noah was repairing a fence, Clara sat on the porch, sketching. The paper trembled slightly under her fingers, but the lines were confident. She looked out across the yard, the wildflowers, the crooked mailbox, the silver glint of the creek. None of it was beautiful by the world's standards, but to her, it was perfect. When Noah came back, she held up the drawing. It showed the parallel bars under the morning light, with three figures standing nearby, one tall, one small, one learning to stand again. "You forgot to draw yourself," he said quietly. She looked at the page, then at him. "No," she whispered, "I didn't." He smiled, understanding. That night, as twilight deepened and rain began again over the bay, Clara stood once more between the rails. Her legs shook, her breath uneven. But when she looked forward, she didn't see pity or fear. She saw the reflection of a woman rediscovering strength, lit by the soft glow of a porch light, and the faith of two hearts that had never stopped believing. And somewhere behind her, Elena's voice rose, small but fierce. "See? I told you, Miss Clara. Rainbows always come after storms." The letter came on a Tuesday morning, folded crisp, official and cold. The kind of envelope that never carried good news. It was wedged between bills and a postcard Elena had drawn for Miss Clara's garden. Noah almost didn't notice it at first, but when he saw the seal of the Halifax family court in the corner, something in his chest tightened. He stood at the porch railing, the paper heavy in his hands. Clara, who had been trimming a pot of lavender nearby, looked up immediately. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. The ocean breeze lifted the corner of the letter like it wanted to read it too. Finally he said quietly, "Someone's filed for custody of Elena." Clara froze. "What?" He nodded, unfolding the document. The words blurred for a second before they settled. Petition for guardianship review, filed by a Mrs. Helen Dorsey, a distant relative by marriage, a woman Noah had met once years ago, who'd never called, never sent a letter, but now wanted to argue that a child deserved a more stable environment than a single man of limited means could provide. Clara's voice sharpened. "She's never even visited." "No," Noah said, eyes flat. "But she's got a lawyer who probably has." Elena came running out from inside, holding a toy rabbit by one ear. "Daddy, Miss Clara made pancakes." She stopped when she saw his face. "Are you sad?" He forced a smile. "Just thinking, baby." But the worry hung heavy, silent and unspoken, through breakfast and into the evening. 2 days later, a car pulled up outside the house. A woman stepped out, short, steady, eyes kind, but sharp. She carried a worn leather satchel and introduced herself as Lydia Moore, legal aid attorney. "I heard about your case through the community center," she said. "They told me you're not the type to ask for help. That's usually the kind of person who needs it most." Noah hesitated, then nodded her in. "I can't afford." "Then it's a good thing I don't charge," she said, setting down her folder. "Let's talk about Elena." Over the next hour, Lydia listened more than she spoke. She asked questions about Elena's school, her health, their routines. Every so often she'd glance at the photos on the mantel. Elena with finger paint on her cheeks. Elena holding a paper kite with Clara beside her. Elena asleep on Noah's chest by the fire. "You've built her a home," Lydia said softly when they finished. "The court will see that. We'll make sure they do." The day of the hearing came gray and wet. The courthouse smelled of coffee and nerves. Noah wore his best shirt, the same one from Clara's first therapy session, and a tie that didn't quite match. Clara sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Elena waited outside with a volunteer, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When their case was called, Noah stood. Across the aisle sat Helen Dorsey, well-dressed, confident, lips pursed in disapproval. Her lawyer spoke first, painting a portrait of concern. "My client only wishes to ensure the welfare of a young girl growing up without proper structure, in a home that lacks financial stability and 2 parental figures." Lydia rose next. "With respect, this case isn't about wealth or structure. It's about presence. Mr. Grant hasn't missed a single doctor's visit, a single school meeting, or a single bedtime story since the day he took that child in. That's not instability, Your Honor. That's devotion." The judge, a woman with silver hair and an expression that could cut through excuses, turned to Noah. "Mr. Grant, do you have anything to add before we proceed?" Noah swallowed hard. The room felt too big, too bright. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I don't have degrees or savings accounts. I don't have a big house. What I have is a little girl who knows I won't leave, ever. And if that's not qualification enough to be her father, then maybe we're measuring the wrong things." A silence settled like mist. Helen's lawyer tried to recover, flipping through papers. "Sentiment is admirable, but the law, Lydia interjected, also recognizes the best interest of the child. Ask her where she feels safe, and I assure you this courtroom will have its answer." At that moment, the door creaked open. Clara rose from her seat, hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," she said, "may I speak?" The opposing counsel objected, but the judge waved him off. "Proceed." Clara took a step forward. Her voice was soft, but carried through the room. 2 months ago I couldn't walk. I'd given up on living. Then I met this man. He didn't give me medicine or money or pity. He gave me belief. He helped me remember how to stand, not just on my feet, but in my life. That same belief is what's raising that little girl, and it's stronger than anything written on a form. For a long moment, no one spoke. The judge's eyes lingered on Noah, then Clara. Finally, she exhaled. The court has heard enough. She looked toward Helen, whose face had gone pale. Ms. Dorsey, I appreciate your concern, but concern without commitment is not guardianship. The child will remain with Mr. Grant. Her gavel struck once, sharp, final. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. Noah stepped down the courthouse stairs, his shoulders trembling with relief. Elena spotted him from the sidewalk and ran full speed into his arms. We're going home? She asked. He nodded, his voice breaking. We're going home, Lydia smiled, slipping her papers back into her bag. Not every fight ends the right way, she said, but today, Justice remembered what love looks like. Clara joined them, her hand brushing Noah's arm. He looked at her, unable to find the right words. She spoke first. You didn't just win, Noah. You reminded everyone in that room what family really means. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. I just told the truth. And sometimes, Clara said, her eyes soft, that's the hardest thing to do. The three of them stood there a while longer, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, the rain easing into drizzle. Elena hummed quietly, clutching Noah's hand in one and Clara's in the other. And for the first time in a long time, the world around them felt steady, like a house finally rebuilt after too many storms. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the custody hearing, a cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of the Nova Scotia Rehabilitation Institute. Noah found it tucked between a hardware store catalog and one of Elena's drawings taped to the mailbox. The paper was thicker than most, the handwriting formal yet personal. Mr. Noah Grant, we've heard about your work and the community healing approach. At Carter Creek, we would be honored if you would speak at our upcoming symposium on restorative care. For a long moment, Noah just stood there, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. Him, standing in front of doctors and scholars. It sounded like a mistake. He wasn't a speaker. He was a man with calloused hands and a patched roof to finish, before the next storm. Clara found him later that evening, still sitting at the table, the letter unfolded in front of him. She smiled when she read it. You have to go. He shook his head. They want professionals, not a carpenter with too much to say. They want truth, she corrected softly. And you've lived it. He exhaled. Public speaking's not in my toolbox. Neither was healing, she said, a spark of humor in her eyes. But you did that too. He smiled, reluctant but warming. You always know what to say. That's because I stole your words, she teased. Then she plucked a small wildflower from the vase on the table, a sprig of blue aster, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. For courage, she said, and when you talk, just pretend you're telling Elena a story. You're good at that. The morning of the lecture dawned bright and clear. The institute overlooked the harbor, glass and steel shimmering against the water. Inside, rows of chairs filled with therapists, nurses, and medical directors. Men and women used to numbers, not feelings. Noah felt the weight of their attention even before he spoke. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat once, then twice. Morning, he began, voice steady but low. I'm not sure why I'm here. A few polite chuckles. I don't have a degree or a title, he continued, his hands resting on the podium. I fix things. Usually roofs, sometimes fences. Lately, I guess, people. The audience quieted. Noah's eyes found the window, the light bouncing off the bay. I used to think healing came from experts, machines, pills. But what I've learned, mostly by accident, is that healing starts smaller than that. It starts with being seen, with someone saying, I won't leave. He spoke about the first time Clara touched the creek water, about her legs trembling in the cold, and her laughter breaking through years of silence. He spoke about Elena, how she once asked if rainbows came even when no one looked, and how he'd realized that sometimes love works the same way. His sentences came slowly, deliberate, each one landing not as lecture, but as truth. People ask what my method is, he said, but I don't have one. I just listen. I stay. I believe until they can believe for themselves. Sometimes that's all it takes. The room was still. A nurse dabbed at her eyes. A doctor shifted in his seat, as if ashamed to have underestimated what compassion could do. Noah smiled faintly. You don't need to be trained to help someone remember they matter. You just need to stay long enough to see it happen. When he stepped away from the podium, there was no hesitation this time. The applause came like a tide, soft at first, then building, wave after wave, until the room stood. Noah blinked, caught off guard, unsure what to do with hands meant for building, not for receiving. He looked out across the audience, and then he saw him. Standing in the back of the hall, half hidden near the door, was Richard Reed. No suit this time, no stern expression, just a man watching quietly. And for the first time, Richard's hands came together. Once, then again. A slow, genuine applause. Their eyes met. And for a second, neither looked away. It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was acknowledgement, the kind that meant more than words ever could. After the lecture, Noah stepped outside into the sunlight. The sea breeze carried the faint sound of gulls and laughter from the docks below. Clara was waiting near the steps, her eyes glistening. You did it, she said. He shook his head. We did it. You're the reason I ever opened my mouth. She smiled. You were brilliant. Even the doctors cried. He looked at her pocket of her dress. Another small blue aster tucked there, twin to the one she'd given him. Guess it worked, he said. She reached for his hand. He was here, wasn't he? Noah nodded. Yeah, back row. Clara's smile faltered, then softened. He's learning. Maybe we all are, Noah said. They stood together for a while, watching the harbor, the wind tangled in Clara's hair, sunlight painting her face gold. Inside, people were still talking about his speech, still quoting lines he hadn't rehearsed. For the first time, Noah didn't feel out of place among them. He wasn't a man who'd wandered into someone else's world. He'd brought his own. And somewhere in that quiet space, between applause and ocean wind, something in him settled, the weight he'd carried for years easing at last. He had spoken. And the world had listened. The first time Noah saw the man, he knew trouble had arrived, dressed in silk. Hugo Lambert stepped out of a polished black sedan that didn't belong on the dirt road to Carter Creek. His shoes were clean enough to shame the mud, and his smile had the kind of shine that only came from money. Behind him trailed two assistants, one carrying a leather briefcase, the other an umbrella, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. Noah was outside fixing a section of fencing that the wind had taken the night before. He looked up as the car door shut, wiping his hands on a rag. Mr. Grant, the man said, extending his hand. Hugo Lambert, I'm from Nova Well Developments. I believe we can be of service to one another. Noah didn't shake the hand. Can't say I've heard of you. You will, Lambert said, undeterred. We're expanding into wellness properties. We've read about your community center. Impressive work, really. The world could use more of it, which is why I want to buy this land. Noah raised an eyebrow. Buy it? Lambert smiled wider. You've done something special here, but it could be bigger. A resort for recovery retreats, state-of-the-art facilities, therapists, yoga gardens, meditation domes. Imagine what your name could stand for if we scale this up. I'll offer well above market value, and you can stay on as a consultant. Noah took off his work gloves and rested them on the post. His tone was calm, but the stillness in his eyes wasn't. This land isn't for sale. Everything is, Lambert replied smoothly. You've done your part. Let professionals handle the rest. Noah's jaw tightened. This isn't a business, Mr. Lambert. It's a promise. People come here to remember they matter. You can't franchise that. Lambert's smile cooled. You're turning down opportunity. I'm turning down forgetting, Noah said. Lambert's expression flickered, a flash of irritation beneath the polished charm. Suit yourself, he said. sliding his sunglasses back on. Just don't be surprised when progress finds you anyway. He left in a blur of tires and expensive dust. For a week, Carter Creek went on as usual. Sessions in the mornings, laughter in the garden, Clara organizing files in the small office. But then whispers began. A reporter called asking about unlicensed treatments. Someone at the town office mentioned an anonymous complaint filed against the center for potential safety violations. By the next Friday, Noah received a formal notice. Permit temporarily suspended pending investigation. He read it twice, then a third time. His hands didn't shake, but the silence around him did. Clara found him by the porch, the letter in his grasp. What happened? They're freezing our license, he said flatly. No new patients until further review. Her eyes darkened. Who would do that? He didn't answer, but they both knew the name. That evening, Clara drove into town and confronted Lambert outside a restaurant where his company was hosting a networking event. He turned, surprised but pleased, as though he'd expected her eventually. Miss Reed, he greeted smoothly. You look radiant. What brings you? Stop pretending, she cut in. You filed that complaint. He tilted his head. Allegations are dangerous words. So is greed. He chuckled. Come now. I admire what you and Mr. Grant have built. But look around. This place could employ hundreds, attract funding. I'm not the villain here. I'm the visionary. Visionaries don't destroy what they envy, Claire said. They build something of their own. For the first time, Lambert's mask slipped. You think love and sentiment can protect that man? You're naive. The world runs on contracts, not compassion. She stepped closer, eyes sharp as glass. Then maybe the world needs rewriting. Back at the house, Noah sat by the fire, with Elena asleep against his chest. Clara told him what had happened. I shouldn't have gone, she said quietly. He's the kind of man who feeds on confrontation. Noah smiled faintly. So am I sometimes, but we fight different. She took his hand. We'll appeal. We'll show them your work is real. He nodded, though his eyes were far away. It's not the papers that worry me. It's the doubt. Once people start believing lies, truth has to climb uphill. Days turned to weeks. The center stood quiet. Patients stopped calling. Even the garden felt still, the air heavier somehow. One afternoon, Richard arrived unexpectedly. He walked through the gate, dressed down but still carrying the weight of authority. Clara was surprised to see him. I heard what happened, he said. Lambert's making noise downtown, calling Carter Creek a liability. Then use your voice, kid, Clara urged. You know what this place does. You saw it. Richard hesitated, looking past her toward Noah, who was kneeling in the dirt, repairing a broken step. You're asking me to choose between reputation and redemption, he said softly. No, Clara replied. I'm asking you to remember which one lasts longer. Richard didn't answer. That night, Noah sat alone on the porch. The air was cold, sharp with sea salt. Across the yard, the light from Clara's window flickered against the glass. She was still awake, probably drafting another appeal. He looked at the empty path leading to the gate, remembering Lambert's polished shoes standing on that same dirt. He thought of all the hands that had built this place, his, Clara's, even Richard's in a way. He whispered to the night, not in anger, but in resolve, You can't buy faith. You can only live it. A gust of wind carried the words into the dark. Inside, Elena stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about rainbows, and Noah realized that maybe the world would always try to take what it didn't understand. But as long as people kept believing, one child, one woman, one broken soul at a time, Carter Creek would never truly be for sale. The storm that Lambert had stirred didn't fade quietly. It fractured, then gathered into something else entirely. By the second week, envelopes began to appear at Noah's gate. Some were neat, some crumpled, some drawn on by children, with clumsy rainbows and stick figures holding hands. Inside were words, short, simple, trembling with sincerity. You helped my son walk again. You taught me to trust people after I lost everything. Because of Carter Creek, I'm still here. Others came as videos, recorded on old phones, shaky but heartfelt. An elderly woman sitting in her kitchen with a mug of tea saying, "I couldn't climb stairs before, now I dance in the garden." A young veteran holding his toddler, voice cracking, "He calls me Dad again because I stopped hiding." Within days, the small mailbox overflowed, so Clara set up a wooden crate beneath it. Lydia came twice a week to collect the letters, sorting them by type, date, and story. "They'll need this evidence," she told Noah. "Real voices, real lives." Noah watched her load another stack of envelopes into her car. "You think it'll be enough?" Lydia smiled. Truth has a way of sounding louder when a community speaks it. A week later, Lydia submitted the petition, an application for something new, something that didn't even exist formally yet: community restorative designation. It was a legal recognition meant for grassroots healing programs that didn't fit the boxes of conventional medicine, but had proven measurable results. "It's a long shot," Lydia admitted during their meeting at the town hall. "But if it passes, it'll mean Carter Haven." "Carter what?" Noah interrupted. "Carter Haven," Clara repeated softly, smiling. "That's what we're renaming the center. Haven means safe place." Noah blinked as though the word itself had weight. "A safe place, twice he murmured. "That's what it was supposed to be from the start." The day of the council hearing arrived cold and overcast, the kind of Halifax morning where fog rolled like breath across the street. The town hall was packed. Locals, reporters, even a few faces Noah recognized from the Institute, where he'd spoken weeks earlier. Clara squeezed his hand before they entered. "Whatever happens, they've already seen who you are." Inside, the council chamber smelled of damp paper and coffee. At the front sat 5 members of the municipal board, 3 men, 2 women, all with folders thick enough to crush nerves. Lydia stood first, her posture composed, her voice clear. "This petition contains over 400 letters of support and 29 recorded testimonies from residents, patients, and healthcare professionals across Nova Scotia. The request is simple: to recognize Carter Haven as a community restorative facility under new classification, allowing it to continue operations legally." The chairwoman adjusted her glasses. "Miss Moore, we've reviewed the documents. They are extensive, but this designation doesn't yet exist in our code. Creating it will require a special vote." Lydia nodded. "Then vote. Let the law catch up to the people it serves." A murmur rippled through the room. Then Lambert's representative stood, a sharp-dressed man in a blue suit. "With respect," he began, "we cannot base policy on sentiment. Mr. Grant has no formal training. This center runs on goodwill, not regulation. If we open the door for one, we risk chaos." Noah listened silently, eyes steady. Clara's hand tightened around his. Lydia was about to respond when the back door opened. Heads turned. Richard Reed walked in. He wore no tie, no briefcase, just a weathered coat and the expression of a man who had decided which side of history he wanted to stand on. Without waiting for permission, he approached the podium. "Mr. Reed," the chairwoman said, surprised, "you're not on the list of speakers." "I won't be long," Richard said, "but I need to say this." The room quieted. Even Lambert's lawyer leaned back, wary. "I've built towers and hospitals," Richard began, voice low but sure. "Structures meant to last. Yet I've learned something watching this man work. You can raise steel and glass, but it means nothing if people inside stop believing in one another. Mr. Grant didn't build a building, he built trust. And if we lose that, if we tell people like him that only money and credentials define value, then the next storm that comes will wash more away than walls." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "He fixed my daughter's legs, yes. But more than that, he fixed her will to live. And I don't care what the codebook says. If that isn't healing, then maybe the book is wrong." The silence afterward wasn't fragile, it was reverent. The chairwoman cleared her throat, visibly moved. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." A motion was raised. Vote to approve the creation of the community restorative designation and grant Carter Haven operational status. Hands lifted. One, then another, and another. 4 in favor. 1 abstained. The gavel struck once. Motion carried. Outside, the sun broke through the fog. as if the world had been waiting for its cue. The townspeople who'd gathered began clapping, cheering, some even crying. Clara threw her arms around Noah, laughing through tears. "You did it," he shook his head, smiling. "No, we did it." And they finally listened. From the steps, Lydia grinned, exhausted but triumphant. "Carter Haven is officially recognized. You're not just a carpenter anymore, Noah. You're a precedent." He laughed quietly, a sound full of disbelief and gratitude. Richard approached last. For a moment, the two men simply stood there, the crowd's noise softening to a hum around them. Richard extended his hand. "You were right," he said. "Some foundations don't need blueprints." Noah shook it, firm but gentle. "And some walls are worth rebuilding together." As they stood beneath the crisp sky, Clara and Elena joined them, the four figures silhouetted against the brightening light. Around them, the townsfolk lifted lanterns made from jars, their flames flickering gold in the wind. The sign over the entrance, newly painted, read, "Carter Haven Center." And for the first time in months, the gate was open again, not just to the people of the town, but to anyone who needed to remember that faith, once shared, could become unbreakable. The wind off the Atlantic had softened by spring. The hills behind Carter Haven turned a deeper green, and the smell of salt and cedar drifted through open windows. Work crews came and went, their laughter echoing through the valley as beams rose, paint dried, and glass caught the morning light. For the first time in months, every sound felt like part of something being built, not repaired. Inside the main hall, Clara stood barefoot on the new wooden floor, sketching the last details of the design plan. She had drawn the layout herself, a space that opened toward the ocean with wide windows and a long, communal table where no one would sit apart. Noah knelt nearby, measuring the frame for a set of handrails. "You could have left the architecture to me," she teased, pencil tapping against her notebook. "You already took over the design," he replied, smiling without looking up. "I'm just trying to keep up." She walked closer, brushing sawdust from his shoulder. "You know, you build straighter lines than any blueprint I've ever seen." "That's because I don't start with lines," he said. "I start with people." Clara laughed softly. "Then maybe that's why this place finally feels alive." Outside, Elenos was painting a wooden sign on the porch. Her tongue stuck out in concentration as she wrote in bright blue paint, "The Haven That Listens." When she showed it to them, her hands were smudged with color, and her grin was wider than the sky. "It's perfect," Clara said, kneeling beside her. "Why that name, sweetheart?" Elena shrugged. "Because everyone here listens. Even the walls do." Noah looked at the sign for a long moment, the words sinking into him like sunlight through clouds. "Then that's what we'll call it." By the end of the week, the new sign hung above the entrance, the letters uneven but radiant. People who passed by smiled, some stopping just to touch the wood, as if it held something sacred. News of the decision spread beyond the town. Carter Haven was mentioned on local radio, then in regional papers. Reporters came for short interviews, snapping photos of the rebuilt garden and the laughter spilling from the workshops. Hugo Lambert tried one last time to stir doubt, an article hinting that emotional narratives often obscure financial instability, but no one bit. The town had already chosen its truth. By early summer, Lambert withdrew his interest quietly, selling off his regional holdings and moving his development to another province. The day it became official, Halifax locals gathered outside Carter Haven with homemade banners that read, "We keep what's ours." That night, the townspeople threw a small celebration in the square. Strings of lights crisscrossed between lampposts, and the scent of grilled corn and sugar pie filled the air. Children ran barefoot through puddles left by a light rain. Noah stood near the edge of the crowd, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets, watching as Elena danced with the other kids, her laughter cutting through the music. Clara joined him, cheeks flushed from the cold. "This is the first time in years the town has come together like this," she said. He nodded. "Maybe they just needed to believe in something again." "Or someone," she said. glancing at him. Noah smiled faintly. I'll settle for something. But when Clara took his hand, her fingers laced with his like roots finding soil, he didn't argue. A week later, Richard arrived at the center carrying a long, flat envelope. He found Noah in the garden, mending a trellis where wild roses had begun to climb. I figured you'd be here, Richard said. You're impossible to find when there's work to be done. Noah stood wiping his hands. Old habits. They keep me out of trouble. Richard handed him the envelope. Then here's a new one. Ownership papers. The land, the buildings, the garden. It's yours, legally and fully. Noah stared at it, unsure what to say. I thought the foundation agreed, Richard interrupted. It's time it belonged to the man who made it matter. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind carried the faint hum of waves. Finally Noah said quietly, I don't know how to thank you. Don't, Richard said. Just keep proving me wrong. He turned to leave, but Clara appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. You're staying for lunch, right? Richard smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. I suppose I could make time for that. Later that afternoon, the 4 of them, Noah, Clara, Richard, and Elena, sat at the long table by the window, the sea glowing like glass beyond the horizon. They talked about nothing and everything, the next planting season, the new therapy wing, Elena's plans to paint murals in every hallway. When the light began to fade, Elena pointed toward the horizon. Look, she whispered, the sky's doing that pink thing again. Clara followed her gaze. The sunset poured across the water in bands of rose and gold. Noah rested a hand on the table, the paper of ownership still folded neatly beside him. This doesn't feel like the end, he said softly. It feels like something beginning. Clara smiled. That's what home feels like. Outside, lanterns began to glow in the garden, lighting the path that led to the creek. The wind carried laughter, the sound of a hammer somewhere, and the distant hush of the ocean breathing. Carter Haven no longer belonged to one man, or even one family. It belonged to everyone who had ever walked through its doors and found a piece of themselves waiting. And as dusk deepened into night, Noah looked around the place he'd built, not for profit, not for pride, but for people, and thought, finally, this is what heritage means. The rain started early that morning, soft at first, the kind that whispered across the rooftops instead of striking them. By noon, the mist had rolled in from the Atlantic, wrapping Carter Haven in a silver haze. The guests arrived one by one, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers. Against the pale sky, Noah stood under the wooden awning he had built himself, straightening his tie for the 5th time. His jacket was simple, the kind you could mistake for Sunday best, but the look in his eyes was the quiet awe of a man who'd already found what he never thought he deserved. Out by the path, Lydia was arranging chairs that no one would sit in. The drizzle had made sure of that. You sure you want to do this outside? She called, smiling despite the downpour. Noah looked out toward the sea, where waves blurred into fog. It wouldn't feel right inside, he said. The rain's just the sky joining in. The band, 2 fiddles and a weathered guitar, tuned under the eaves. Their laughter mingled with the soft patter on the deck. From the small garden, Elena appeared, clutching a basket of wildflowers. She wore a crown of daisies, her curls damp and shining. Is it time yet? She asked, eyes wide. Almost, Noah said, kneeling to fix one of the ribbons on her wrist. You ready for your big moment? She nodded fiercely. I practiced walking slow. Miss Clara said it's not a race. Noah chuckled. She's right. Take your time. Today's meant to last. When the music began, it was barely audible over the rain. The guests rose instinctively, turning toward the steps that led down from the main house. Clara appeared at the top, framed by light and mist. She wore an ivory dress, modest, flowing, stitched by her own hands, and no veil, because she wanted the rain to touch her face. Richard stood beside her, holding her arm. For a long moment, he didn't move. You okay, Dad? She whispered. He nodded, though his throat worked around the words. You know, I used to think weddings were about letting go, he said quietly. But now I know they're about believing someone will stay. Clara smiled through the shimmer of rain. You did let go, though. Richard squeezed her hand. No, sweetheart. I just learned you can walk without me now. They began down the path. The wooden boards creaked beneath their feet, water pooling in the grain. Guests leaned aside to let them pass. When they reached the steps, Richard stopped, took her hands, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. She's all yours, Noah, he said, voice thick but steady. Noah, standing at the altar, if you could call a porch railing an altar, nodded once. She's always been her own. Clara met his gaze, her smile small, unguarded, completely alive. The ceremony was short, not because they wanted it to be, but because the rain refused to wait. Lydia read a few lines from a poem she'd found in a library book. Elena scattered petals across the wet boards, some sticking to her shoes, some carried off by the wind. The smell of wet pine and salt filled the air. When it was time for the vows, Noah took Clara's hands. The droplets on their skin made it hard to tell where rain ended and tears began. I can't promise perfect, he said, voice soft but sure. I can't promise I'll always know what to say or how to fix what breaks, but I promise I'll stay. I'll listen. I'll build with you, even when the world tries to wash it all away. Clara's fingers trembled in his. And I promise, she whispered, that I'll never run from the storm again. Because you taught me how to dance in it. Elena giggled behind them. You're supposed to kiss now. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Richard smiled. Noah leaned forward, rain sliding down his jaw, and kissed her, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't chase passion but gratitude. The guests cheered, some wiping their eyes, some simply standing still, caught in the beauty of it all. Rain mixed with tears. Thunder murmured like applause from the sea. Later, as the storm eased, the celebration carried into the evening. Tables were pulled onto the porch. Candles flickered in mason jars. The fiddles began again, their rhythm light and warm. Someone passed plates of blueberry pie. Elena danced barefoot in puddles, her dress hem soaked, shouting for Clara and Noah to join her. They did. Under the dim glow of lanterns and a sky still dripping with silver, the three of them moved, awkward, laughing, free. Clara's dress clung to her knees, Noah's shirt to his back, but neither cared. Around them neighbors clapped along, some humming old folk tunes, others swaying quietly with their partners. Richard watched from the steps, his hands folded, eyes soft. When Clara turned and caught his gaze, he lifted his glass slightly. She smiled and mouthed, "Thank you." He shook his head. "No," he murmured to himself. "Thank you." By nightfall, the storm had passed completely. The ocean was calm again, its surface glimmering with reflected lantern light. Noah and Clara sat side by side on the porch rail, Elena curled up asleep against her mother's lap. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" Clara asked. Noah shook his head. "No, I never thought it would end at all." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe it doesn't." He smiled, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. "Then we'd just keep walking through the rain." In the distance, the waves murmured against the shore. The laughter from the remaining guests drifted softly behind them. Above, the clouds finally broke apart, revealing a scatter of stars, each one reflected in the puddles below, like heaven and earth quietly agreeing on something rare. And under that endless sky, the carpenter, the woman who had learned to stand again, and the child who had taught them both to believe sat together, their story written not in stone or vows, but in the rain that had blessed every beginning. 5 years later, Carter Haven had outgrown its borders. What started as one weathered house by the Halifax shore had become a network of centers scattered across Atlantic Canada, each one built by hands that once trembled, now steady. The sign above every door carried the same words Elena had painted long ago. The haven that listens. Clara walked through the main building's new wing one morning, clipboard in hand, nodding to volunteers. The walls were covered with children's drawings, photos of former patients, and letters written in crayon and ink alike. Above her office door hung a new plaque, Grant Reed Foundation, Healing the Heart of Communities. She smiled at it every day, not for pride, but for memory. At home, Elena sat at the kitchen table, now 11, scribbling in her school notebook. Her hair was longer, her laughter deeper. It's for the storytelling contest, she told Noah, who was fixing a shelf nearby. The theme is a hero in your life. Sounds like a big topic, Noah said, tightening a screw. Who'd you pick? She grinned. You. He laughed softly. You're supposed to surprise people. I did, she said. Because it's not about the time you fixed the roof or taught me to fish. It's about when you taught Mom to walk again. Not with her legs, but with her heart. Noah froze for a second, his hand resting on the screwdriver. He turned slowly toward her, the kind of look that held both pride and disbelief. That's a good story, he said quietly. Just make sure you tell it your way. I already am, she said. You always said stories heal people too. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Halifax skyline, the family sat on the porch where everything had once begun. The garden swayed with the soft hum of summer, and the smell of lilacs drifted through the rain that had just started to fall. Clara leaned her head against Noah's shoulder, her voice low and full. 5 years, she said. Feels like forever, and just yesterday. He smiled. That's how peace sneaks up on you. They watched Elena chase fireflies across the wet grass, her laughter carrying through the silver dusk. For a long moment, the world seemed still, the waves calm, the sky bruised with gold and violet. Clara turned to him. Do you ever think about how far we've come? Noah nodded, his fingers finding hers. Every day, he said, and I still think the hardest part wasn't fixing anything. It was believing we could. She smiled, tears glinting in the fading light. The rain began to fall harder, tapping gently on the wood around them. Noah looked out toward the horizon, where sea met sky in a seamless line. Healing isn't a miracle, he murmured. It's a habit. Clara squeezed his hand, and they sat together, the rhythm of the rain blending with the quiet beating of two hearts that had learned, after every storm, how to stay.